Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East. Volume 1, Chapter 19. 5 o'clock the next morning found us all assembled on the roof of the temple. After the regular morning greetings, we gathered around, and as is the usual custom, a selection was read. The selection this morning was from the records of the temple. Jas translated them, and we were surprised to find that the translation closely corresponded to the first chapter of St. John in our Bible, and the second reading corresponded to the first chapter of Luke. After the reading, we asked if we might get our Bible and compare the versions. They readily consented, and with the assistance of Jas, we made the comparison and were surprised at the similarity. We had scarcely finished when the breakfast call sounded and all went in. After breakfast we prepared to descend to the village, and for the time, the comparison left our minds. When we arrived, we found quite a number congregated from the nearby country, and were told by Jas that they were nearly all shepherds that pastured their flocks in the high mountains in summer, and the time for leaving the lower regions was fast approaching. We were told that such a meeting as would take place that afternoon was always called just before the people departed. As we walked through the village, we met Emil's nephew, and he suggested we go for a short walk before lunch. We accepted the invitation readily, as we wished to see some of the country around. While we were on this walk, several places were pointed out in the valley as being of special interest. The names, when translated, very closely resembled those of the earlier Bible names, but the real significance of all this did not present itself until we had returned, had lunch, and were seated among those that had assembled. There were about 200 in this assembly when the rest of our friends from the temple appeared. Then Emil's nephew arose and approached two men holding what looked to us like a large book. When this was opened, it proved to be a box in the form of a book. He selected a package which consisted of flat leaves like those of a manuscript. Then the box was placed on the ground. The package was handed to one of the men. He opened it and handed the first leaf to Emil's nephew. When the reading of each leaf was finished, it was handed to the other man, who placed it in the box. The reading proceeded, with Jas as interpreter. It had not gone very far when we saw that it bore a striking resemblance to the book of St. John, carried out much more in detail. Then followed one similar to that of Luke, then one similar to that of Mark, and the final one was like that of Matthew. After the reading, the people collected in little groups, and we, with Jas, sought Emil, for we were curious to know the meaning of it all. We were told that these records were read each year at the meeting, and that this place was the center of the country where these scenes were enacted long years ago. We remarked the similarity of these happenings with those chronicled in our Bible, and were told that there was no question but that some of the earlier scenes as chronicled in our Bible were taken from these records, but those happenings of a later date, such as the crucifixion, took place elsewhere, the whole reaching its climax in the birth and life of Christ. The foremost thought of it all was the search for the Christ in man, and to show those who had wandered away from the ideal that the Christ lived in them, as he always had. Emil went on to say, "It does not matter where the scenes were enacted, it is the underlying spiritual significance which we wish to perpetuate." We spent the balance of the afternoon and the next day making comparisons and taking notes. Space will not permit the inclusion here of these notes and comparisons, but the spiritual meaning will be understood by reading these chapters mentioned above. We found that the father of Emil's nephew, who read the records to us, was born in the village, and was a direct descendant of John, and that it was the custom for some member of the family to come to this place at this time and read these records. The temple above us was the one where Zacharias and John both had worshipped. We found that our friends wished to be on their way, so it was arranged that Jas would stay with us, and the others would go on. We finished with the records the next day, then left the temple early the morning after. Although the hour was early, nearly all the villagers were up to bid us Godspeed.